Okay, so
yeah.
Neuroscientists who study somatic empathy, they define it as experiencing what other people feel while being aware that this vicarious state is produced by someone else. So there's a bit of a tautological kind of, well, there's a bit of tautology in the definition, in that they're saying you already know it's produced by somebody else. But what if you don't? What if you've just got these unclear somatic sensations when you're working on anybody? So just want to check in whether any of you have got this experience. I mean, do you have a very clear idea of what's yours and what is someone else's, or does it sometimes get a bit muddled up? Anybody?
I'm assuming somatic empathy is also about emotional responses.
Yeah, so emotion, physical pain, interpersonal physiology, so you're catching their reactivity, their heart rate, their breathing, interbrain coupling, so you're starting to get their thought patterns. So emotional, physiological, mental, all these, the whole system. What it is a system coupling that's going on. Yeah, so this is all in the course. So sorry, I didn't give you the background there.
No, it's okay. So the emotional is easier to discern whether it's mine or somebody else's. Much easier to say, well, actually, you know, that's not my feeling, because.
How do you know?
Well, because I feel I'm resonating with somebody else's feeling if suddenly I feel very sad or want to cry, you know, because before I wasn't feeling sad or wanted to cry. So
exactly, so you're comparing before and during.
Yeah.
And the other thing you say is that you know it's not yours because there's this familiarity. So sometimes I will get a sensation that's totally unlike me. You know, it's not my normal. And so it's really clear that it's not my normal. And that helps, you know, knowing your own patterns, really, really important, so that when they change, you go, that's not me. But the before and after, sometimes you miss it, don't you? Because you've got confused with, you know, you're chatting about something and you haven't realized that, you know, maybe some anxieties crept up on you. And you think maybe it's your own. So what we do what I do in shiatsu is I have a very clear transition from before I connect with them and then once I connect with them. And that comes from knowing the mechanisms, which we'll get to in a minute. But the other thing you pick out is that emotions are the easiest thing. Is that what you find to share? Yeah. Has anyone else got that experience of how you know what's yours? Rachel, your microphone's not on. How you know what's yours and what's someone else's?
For me, it's the easiest is physical, because I know my body well enough by now to know. But I don't know, maybe that's, now that I'm saying it, it sort of sounds strange, because how can I pick up? I mean, we probably do pick up other people's pain, like you said. Pain contagion, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yes, so during shiatsu, I sometimes get a bit of acidity, and then I know that I'm trying too hard, for example, and I know that it's mine because that what happens to me. And yeah, so physical I thought would be the easiest for me, but now I'm not so sure anymore.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I get the physical stuff really strongly. I mean, we've all got our different kind of tendencies and preferences. Some people pick up the mental processing much more easily than the emotional or physical. So it's really important to know your normal. You know that you're normal, but know your normality, so that you can notice when something becomes different. Yeah. But the problem with that is, and this is because of how somatic empathy works, is that we're basically simulating in our own system what our unconscious has perceived in the other person. Now, we're more likely to recognize that if it's happened to us before, if we've recognized it. So I'll try and give a specific example, but let's say I've had depression in the past. So when I connect somatically with a client and I suddenly get a wave of depression, I recognize it because I've had that in the past. I recognize it. Now, that's a problem because I'm recognizing it. So that's a selective process, and it feels like mine, feels exactly like mine. And in fact, it is mine, you know, but what it is a simulation of theirs. So this is why it's such an interesting topic to discuss, is because somatic empathy actually is yours. It's all yours, but it's your unconscious interpretation of what's going on for them. So I'm getting you away from this idea that you actually catch something from them. You don't catch something from them. What your system does is simulate what it's perceiving in them. And so we are more likely to have somatic empathy that is familiar to us, just by definition. You know, I cannot, well, I'll try and give you a specific example, but if I'm working on someone, I can often get somatic empathy that I don't recognize. It's just a really weird feeling and I don't know what it is. I can't nail it down to an emotion or a situation or whatever. And it's just that I've never experienced what this person is going through. And I can't label it because I haven't got the memory, the somatosensory memory. So you end up experiencing somatic empathy that's kind of, it's always limited to your own experience. You know, so that's why I think some people get clients of a certain type and others get clients of another type, you know, is because you're recognizing them on a really deep, profound level. And so they come back, you know. And some people that I don't recognize their stuff don't come back because, you know, we haven't had this shared experience. So it's really interesting because it's not like, you know, everyone I touch, I pick up what's going. It's not like that at all. It's, you know, it's got to go through my filter of my experience, and I've got to recognize it from my past.
I think it's interesting what you were saying about the sort of the naming of it and the recognition, because I think if I feel it's when I am more clear that I am picking up on someone else's experience, it almost disappears in my body. So, for example, you know, like heart activation, gut twisting. If I'm with a client and I maybe ask them about it, and then it will settle in me.
Totally.
So,
yeah,
you know, it's something about that naming, maybe.
it is, and I think it's because, and this is what I'm writing about in a book called Another Self, is that it's what scientists are suggesting is that it's a form of intelligence, a somatic assessment of others. And once we've got the information, that's it. We don't need it anymore. You know, once we've named it, that's it. Next thing. And it really fits with our experience, doesn't it? Because literally once you've identified it and named it, it's gone. But obviously, the more attention you pay to it, you can exaggerate it. And that's another danger of something, you know, you might have a really anxious client, and if you focus on their anxiety, the both of you can get in quite a tiz. And the idea is just to take your attention away from their anxiety, you know. So I have a window full of plants that I look out at and settle myself, and then that settles them and whatever. Because all I need is the information that they're anxious. I don't need to actually experience it for a whole hour.
Please no.
Preferably not.
So is the change in us then creating a change in them from that resonance?
The thing is, it's the reason that the Somatic Empathy Explained course is so long is that when we get into how it works, you have to get into how perception works. And perception is embodied, basically. So everything that you see or hear or touch has to run through a three-dimensional embodied process in order for your unconscious to understand what it is. And then your higher intellect can kind of label it and categorize it and whatever. But the primary layer of perception is embodied in it seems in all animals, because that's what happened before language. You had to feel how things were, you couldn't work it out. So if you are interested in your client and let's imagine they're asleep or resting or drifting off, but you're interested in them. So what happens is you start to embody perception about them. So you start to get somatic empathy about them. But if they become interested in you, even fleetingly, then they will start to embody what's going on for you. And so this is the dynamic in therapy, is to model the condition that you want your client to have. Because even fleetingly, they will be interested in you because you're crawling all over them or doing whatever you're doing. Their unconscious is definitely interested in you because you could be a threat or, an opportunity. So they will start to take on what you're modeling. And that's really, really important. And, when we're training, we learn to leave all our stuff behind, because otherwise the client's just going to, model it all, take it all. And you can use that as part of your therapy is, if someone's got no confidence, you can just ooze assertiveness and confidence, and, they'll pick up a little bit of it through simulation and embodied perception rather than catching anything from you. That's quite an important point, because this works over Zoom, it works at a distance. This is not about, being in a shared bubble of energy So, the shared bubble of energy might do something else and contribute. But what I mean is you don't need that. It can work because it's all about perception. Perception's absolutely amazing. I'm still enthralled.
I want to actually ask, can I quickly ask or say?
Of course.
This is that sort of, I don't know how to call it, but I'll call it dominant sort of influence in a relationship or in a meeting or in any interaction. Because what I've noticed, because I teach Qigong as well, and I teach quite small groups, sort of 6-7 women. And even when there are a couple of them who just like chatting and sort of saying, oh, it's snowing outside. And I'm like, we're doing Qigong, sort of let's just focus on our movement, on our body and stuff. And after a few minutes, they do settle and come into themselves. But you need to sort of not let them do it, or don't get angry or anything. Just really sort of be very, very calm and, sort of start talking about the breath and stuff like that. And then it's sort of the whole circle actually settles. And
it's true. Yes. And it's really interesting. And in the brain coupling research, because what happens in the brain coupling, as soon as you are paying attention to someone and you're trying to understand them, what happens is your brains come into coordination. They start to process information in the same way. And that's how you understand people, is that your brain starts to process information the same way as theirs. Now, what has been found on animal studies, not been done with humans, don't know why, but with animal studies, that certain animals have hierarchies, social hierarchies. So they have a dominant and a subordinate. And what they found is that the dominant rodent doesn't change their mind at all. They're very inflexible. And all the subordinates kind of just yield to this dominant brain. And they just fall into line with the dominant brain. And it's really interesting from sort of evolutionary biology, because they're saying it's very adaptive to drop into line with a confident brain. Because if you're in a group, you haven't got time for all of the individuals to work out all the pros and cons of everything. And if one of the minds has worked it all out and is very confident, it's much better to just fall in line with them. And so we're really prone to falling in line with people who are just confident, even if they're stupid. You know, I can't help thinking of Trump, but, you know, it's that when someone's really confident and, or, you know, that sort of soft, assertive, I know what I'm doing. The brains will just sync with them, and unconsciously. And I think that's really interesting. And also, you know, something to be wary of.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, they've not done it on, not looked at it in humans, but the animal models are looking really strong.
So, Cindy, something I'm interested in. So there's sort of somatic empathy when we have moments where we can sense it at the time. Okay, there's something, and maybe we're able to name it for ourselves or with a client or with another person. But I'm interested about ways of then processing those perceptions that are sort of a little bit underneath that conscious awareness. So I suppose the sense of, you know, unease or something just not being quite right. I don't know if you have any ideas about
I mean, I
self-care. Maybe
one thing I would say is don't try and over process somatic empathy, because it is a non-verbal, primitive but incredibly sophisticated intelligence. I don't try and overcomplicate it with my stuff, with my interpretations. So I quite often get what you've just described, and there's something not right. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to name it. I just don't like the way this is feeling. It feels sticky, yucky. You know, there's some swirly stuff that I don't know what it is. And that's as much as I need to know something's not right. You know, and I won't pursue that to try and label it, because I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. You know, and at the worst end of the spectrum would be, to tell the client, you've been possessed by a demon because I can see black stuff coming. You know, it's all your stuff. Get out the way, you know. So I'm really happy to just not know, but to really respect the feeling of unease. I mean, a classic example is I was working on an elderly client, and I had a whole hour of impending doom, you know, really, oh my God, you know, and loads of visual images of death and funerals and skeletons. And it's like, yeah, okay, I've got it. Don't go on. And she did die within 2 days. And the thing is that, you know, obviously there was no point in telling her. The information isn't useful for her, but it was informative for me, is to notice those weird feelings are relevant. They're authentic. They're useful for you. And
so then I suppose by what I mean in relation to the processing might be you having a walk or meditating, or, you know, so that sort of
how to deal with it afterwards. Yes. Okay, so this comes down to how it works, and because all the neurological evidence is pointing to the fact that it's about perception, and it's about when your mind is trying to understand a person, it's simulating what's going on in your body. Now, as soon as you take your attention onto something else and simulate that, you've got rid of it. So let's say you're working on someone who, because I have done this, you know, where it feels absolutely horrible, and it turns out they're precancerous, and, you know, it feels gross, it's sticky, it's yucky, and I want to vomit and whatever. But I don't need to necessarily you know, do anything in particular, but I do need to focus with trying to understand something that's healthy. So it might be just playing with my cat, or, as you say, go for a walk and really try to understand the trees, and nature, which is, you know, different. And your body will start to simulate nature, or it'll try to simulate what's going on out there. So shifting, it's sort of like whatever you look at, whatever you pay attention to is being embodied in you. So if you can shift it to something good, you know, so the worst thing would be to do a heavy day of body work where you're focused on really sick people and then come indoors and watch the news about Ukraine and drink a bottle of wine, you know. You're not going to shift it. You're going to be putting trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. Yeah. So I don't think we necessarily, because, you know, I teach Qigong as well, and people are always asking about, you know, doing Dao Yins to clear the body and everything, but it really comes down to what you're doing with your attention and trying to understand. It's that comprehension process that is embodied. It's quite tricky to get across, but.
Can I ask something with in terms of that? Just what you said, the a comprehension that is embodied.
Yes.
I think that's key. I have training as a movement psychotherapist, which I did 20 years ago, and we weren't talking at all about somatic empathy at the time. And I was just like, oh, why are we not talking about this and explaining it scientifically? And the thing that we did in terms of working with a client with movement is then to process what we felt in movement on our own. So to do spontaneous improvisation in whichever form, you know, we felt right, to process whatever was happening inside, which came about as from connecting to someone else's movement. And that felt really powerful because, and I actually do it sometimes after a shiatsu session now, you know, to move, because then it feels like I'm embodying whatever it is I have experienced on whichever level I have experienced it, and kind of externalizing it through movement. And then it kind of goes away. It's like.
Yes, I would just add a caution that if you continue to think about this person after they've gone, then you will continue to perceive their illnesses, their patterns, whatever's going wrong with them. So, you know, I'm really, really clear with my boundaries to the point of like, you know, as soon as you've left the room, you don't exist, because, you know, I won't drag it over. You know, I cannot afford to be interested in people in between sessions.
Yeah, it's more about being interested in my own response to what's happened and processing my own response, not thinking of the person anymore, but processing how I feel at that very moment, which is like something that was left over, and I can't shift in any other way. You know, I can't shift it by looking out the window and seeing the trees. It's not enough. I can't shift it by, you know, eating chocolate, for example. And it has to become more.
We can try.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. And we are going to come across resonances. So as we've already discussed, when you recognize some somatic empathy, it can be quite strong because you know what it is, you've had it before, and they can stay around quite a long time because of that recognition and because of, you know, I mean, you know, we all call it resonance and whatever, but it can stick around a long time. And as you say, it's then what do you do with that? And for me, it's usually something that I haven't quite sorted myself. You know, if it's sticking around, it's something I haven't quite sorted myself. Pets, you know, I get very upset about people who, you know, can't manage or dump their emotions on their pets. I just think it's, you know, something we've got to be more mindful of is, you know, being aware of how other people are picking up our stuff as well. So, anyway, we got only about 10-15 minutes left. How to discern self from other. I just put some topical tips down. The first one I've been going on about is to consider the mechanism, which is your attention, so the way that you perceive. So we've talked about shift your attention. When you put your attention on someone, you feel somatic empathy. If you shift your attention away, the empathy reduces or changes or disappears. You shift it back again, the somatic empathy reemerges. That has proved that it is coming from them, yeah? And I used to do this a lot in the early days. So, for example, I had an itinerant worker come to see me just the once, and he had a damaged left arm and he wanted me to sort his arm out, but it was almost dead. It had no nerve. Anyway, I was working on his leg and I got knocked back across the room with my breath coming out, you know, and shock and nausea. And I said, what on earth has happened to this leg? And he said, oh, yeah, I fell through 3 stories fell off a roof through 3 stories and went onto that leg, you know, and that leg took the whole of it and everything. But what was clear was every time I came back to him and started to focus on the leg again, I got the sensations again. Oh, I feel sick, the shock, you know. So I just had to keep shifting my attention away, thinking about other things, and gradually it dispersed. So that was really clear that the somatic empathy came and went with my attention on a particular location. So they're not usually that clear, as we've already discussed. So the other tip is to consider your intention. So what I mean by this is, if I have a new client, I can set any kind of intention. I can be curious about their emotions. I could wonder to myself, I wonder how they're feeling emotionally. And then I will embody their emotions. I'll get emotion contagion. I'll feel their emotion. But I could also change my intention. I wonder how their hips are feeling. You know, she complained about leg pain. And then I'll start to embody a physical. So you can change your somatic empathy by shifting your intention. Now, if the somatic empathy changes as you shift your intention, then obviously it's theirs, yeah, and not yours. And don't worry about, is it imagination? Because when you look into this stuff, simulation, imagination, memory, they're all the same thing, unfortunately. It all gets a bit weird, you know. Apparently we are just imagining the reality, but there you go. So that's another way of shifting it. And those of us that trained with Cliff, we were trained to do this from the very beginning, is to ask different questions and you get a different result in your body. Does anyone use that at all in your work?
No.
Because you can also do it, and it sounds spooky, but it's true, but you can also intend to inquire about their past and inquire about their future and see what happens. It's worth playing with that one.
So do you ask different questions during the treatment, during shiatsu?
Yes, to myself, yeah, because I'm not interested in one thing for a whole hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on someone, so I start off with a general inquiry in my head, which is usually something like, what's the most important thing I need to know about this person? You know, what's the loudest bit of information? And it's usually nothing to do with what they've given me. You know, they might come in with their left knee. I'm not interested in their knee at all. You know, what hits me is something much more interesting. So yeah, I do first an overview. What's the most important thing about this person? But obviously I've got in mind what they want from the session. But usually I have to say, most people say do whatever needs doing. And so then I'm not going to sustain somatic empathy the whole time. I sample and then I do something about it, treat, and then I'll sample something else and then I'll treat. Yeah. So I'm sort of dipping in and out with intention and attention and feeling interoception, feeling what's going on inside. And you get very good at it. So you might dip in and think, whoa, feel sick when I do that. I'm not going to do that again. But actually it was quite useful to know that, you know, they're nauseous. You feel nauseous when you work on the left leg, but you don't feel nauseous when you work on the right leg. You know, it's interesting. And you may never know why that is, but it is all useful information for your unconscious. And I do totally trust my unconscious to process the information and give me the next clue that I need. You know, I do work on that level, as it were.
Where does intuition fit into this in terms of?
I think that's what it
thought.
is.
Sorry?
I think that's what it is. I think intuition is your unconscious processing information and coming up with the solution.
Okay.
So I will, I might ask, you know, let's say a client's come in and the only thing they are interested in is their bad back. They've had lots of tests. They don't know what it is. Can I give them a clue? So that's my main intention, is to get a clue, but I'm not asking that question all the time. I've asked it and then I let my unconscious get on with it. And it may be that I don't get any clues until the shiatsu's finished. I'm sitting there, I'm tidying up, and then, something comes. Yeah. Oh, actually, it's your hip. And that's my intuition. That's my unconscious trundling away, trying to solve this problem from, you know, all the years of experience and this, that, and the other. And being able to recognize that is just, you know, it's just practice and trust, isn't it, of your own intuition. In the early days, you say, well, I don't know, I think it might be your hip, you know, and over time you get so many people go, yes, it was my hip, you were right. So you start to trust it a bit more. Yeah. So consider what your intention is, because that will change it. And then the other thing I've put is, you know, checking how normal is this feeling for you, which we talked about in the beginning. And those three should help you work out whether what you're feeling is yours or theirs. And the other thing I would say is that somatic empathy can be really fleeting. You know, it's not, I don't have a whole hour of having anxiety with someone who's anxious. I might just get a whoosh of anxiety when I make contact, and then it's gone. And it's allowing all those whooshes, all those transient sensations to add up in your unconscious and allowing them to come back with something that's worthwhile for you. So what all that means is, to be effective, to use this effectively, you have to have a very clear mind. So you have to practice mindfulness, so you know where your attention and intention are, what they're doing, what your mind is doing and what it's not doing. But the you know, knowing what's normal is quite important. Any questions left?
So I just wondered, but I think you sort of partially just answered it, but I was thinking, like, if you ask that question and during treatment, then you get an answer and you get it also in your body, that sort of felt sense of something. And I was just sort of thinking how to use it. So do you sort of, to make it crude, press some points and that sort of,
yeah, you can use it for, you can use it just for information. So for example, I do find that clients don't know what's wrong with them. You know, they think they know, they tell you, but actually it's something else. So I use it for that. I use it for finding out what's really going on that they're not aware of. You know, what's the unconscious processes going on here that they don't know about. And so part of my therapy is actually, if it's appropriate, and it isn't always appropriate, is to reflect that back at the end so it comes into consciousness. Yeah. Okay.
So you would tell them what you had felt, basically,
only if it's appropriate, and quite often it isn't. But if, for example, it's been really clear that, well, for example, let's have a real example. A client was depressed but felt physically well. I felt very sick while I was working on him. I suggested he went back to the doctor to have more blood tests, and there was something wrong. So I just said, I just feel I had to say something. It would be irresponsible not to say anything, that I was feeling, nauseous and whatever while I was working on him. And I don't need to know. I don't need to say that I know there's something wrong. I just say, just go and get a few tests. If I were you, I would. Maybe nothing. Let's hope it's nothing. And sometimes I'll reflect back some sort of mental or emotional image that I've had, and they go, that's interesting. And it's interesting for them because it's their unconscious, that's trundling around. So sometimes just being heard, at that profound level is really therapeutic. But other times I will do something physical, if I can feel that the problem's coming from their back and they've got a bad knee, then I will focus on their back. It gives me information. Edit what you share, I guess, appropriately.
I was just wondering to what degree sort of processing something in your own way, like with breath and release and stuff like that, would help them.
Yes, definitely. The modeling bit, yes, definitely.
Yeah,
so
modeling, that's a really good one.
So if I touch someone and my breath goes right up into my chest and it's really tight, what I do is start breathing really well, really low, and that helps them. It's good information. Or I'll feel my throat tighten because, they've got so much anger or whatever. So you loosen, relax my own throat. So it's just useful information. But I do think it's useful to start practicing discerning self from other, because it's like a training period that you get, and you start to get very good at it. You start to know, that's not me. And to make use of it, find out what you can do that's useful with it. Brilliant.